Last year, we shared how influencers like Dave Ramsey and organizations like Kingdom Advisors are using tax advantaged donor advised funds to fund the anti LGBTQ industrial complex.
Today, we're sharing how Project 2025 is the blueprint designed by the Heritage Foundation and other radical conservative influencers and organizations to expedite the elimination of rights for LGBTQ plus people, women, and immigrants, and to create a church state in the United States of America.
You're listening to Queer Money Podcast, episode 522, and today we're talking with the U.S. House of Representative candidate for Idaho, David Roth, an expert on Project 2025 and the first openly gay candidate for the state of Idaho.
Now, on with the show.
Capital One Auto Navigator does more than just auto financing. We're here to help you find a car you love, too. Shop millions of cars from thousands of dealers nationwide. Research your favorite makes and models. Explore dealers near you and more. All on Auto Navigator.
So welcome, David Roth, to the Queer Money Podcast. We're looking forward to a meaty and informative discussion.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Absolutely. So this is sort of a follow-up to a couple of episodes that David and I did last year on the Queer Money Podcast, where we talked a little bit about how the anti-LGBTQ plus industrial complex has become so well-funded, so well-organized, and they're just so ready to erase LGBTQ plus people away from society, and that we don't think that our community and maybe society at large is quite as in tune with what this complex is doing. And now I think more and more conversations are happening about Project 2025, but it's still not getting enough press attention. And we're concerned, David and I, that it's not going to be well known to much of the community until after it's maybe too late. And actually, right now it might even be a little bit too late. So for our listeners, to set a baseline, could you share what is Project 2025 and what is the mission?
So Project 2025 is a project of the Heritage Foundation, and it's essentially a transition plan for the next presidential transition, with the goal in mind of they want to reform our democracy into a conservative, authoritarian type state where they'll really be able to centralize control. And the way that they want to do this is, well, one of the things that they learned in the first Trump presidency was, though they had a president who was willing to let them do this, they didn't have all the pieces in place, the people in place. There was a lot of pushback, and a lot of the things that they wanted to do, they couldn't do. So Project 2025 said, okay, we know that there's a good chance we're going to have Trump or some other conservative in the White House in the near future. How can we be ready? How can we identify which personnel would need to be switched out and pick who would go in there? How can we identify what policies would need to be changed on day one so that, at a few minutes after the president is sworn in, they can do 180 days worth of work in a matter of hours and really switch out the people in these roles. They're literally already interviewing and vetting people for these various government roles, and really putting into place that mechanism to push forward that agenda, and not waste any time. And they know that they have to move fast because there is likely to be some resistance. Mm-hmm. But as you mentioned before, in a lot of ways, it may already be too late. And by the time that people mobilize and are upset about this, it really could be too late to do anything about it. Much like we saw with the Dobbs decision in the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Nobody was really prepared for that outcome because nobody thought it was a possible outcome. And it seemed so far from the norm. And by the time it happened, everybody was caught unaware. And I think that that's the same thing that is sort of the goal here, is that they will come in and hit the ground running so fast and get things in place before anybody can really do anything about it. One of the things that they really are sort of depending on is this theory of executive unified authority. And what that basically is that when you think about it, the president really can do whatever he wants. There's checks and balances in place to keep him from going off the rails. But what happens when those checks and balances are sort of taken out of the equation?
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about it, if the president wanted to come in and do something, so a great thing that's in, not a great thing, a horrible thing, but an obvious example that's in Project 2025 is a registry of pregnant women. And when you bring that up, you're also seeing that in the Moms Act right now in Congress. When you bring that up to people, even people that would identify as Republican or conservative, they're like, there's no way that you can do that. But stop and think for a minute. If the president says we're going to do this, and Health and Human Services has people in place that say we're going to do this, who's going to stop them? The Supreme Court. We've already shown, we're seeing that the Supreme Court is more concerned with ideology than with the Constitution or what's right. Not to mention 3 of the members were handpicked by Trump. Or you have Congress. Congress's only recourse is impeachment and removal from office, which they have never, ever done with president. We've impeached, but never removed from office. And the barrier for doing that is so high that honestly, the Heritage Foundation, the Project 2025, other coalition members, they see what's really to stop us, or, what's really to stop them from moving forward with this. Because the only guardrails are those checks and balances. And if they are not functioning, it may not be right, but what is anyone going to do about it? It's kind of like the high school bully when you're like, stop picking on me, and they're like, well, how are you going to stop me? And that's much the situation that we'll be in. Our only opportunity to stop is to stop it before it can even happen, or build a congressional majority enough that they would be able to push back and do something. Anyway, so
when the Orange Oompa Loompa said that he would only be dictator for one day or the first day, it's basically what you're describing or saying is that may be all that they need is one day.
Exactly.
And then everything is already in place. All the things fall into place immediately in that 24-hour time period so that no one can challenge their authoritarianism.
Exactly. And so one of the things that you saw in the first Trump presidency was, for example, cabinet level positions or your secretaries of the Interior and all of those types of things that would help, buffer these policies because those have to be confirmed by the Senate. There's a way around that they really exploited during the first presidency, and they would exploit here again. Though the secretary has to be appointed and confirmed by the Senate. If there's no secretary in place, the highest ranking person there is then de facto acting. And they had this with a lot of cabinet level positions in the first Trump presidency. There were acting people who were running things that were never confirmed by the Senate, because the way the law is written, if there's not anyone confirmed, then the highest ranking person would act until such time as there is. And so what Project 2025 does is builds an employee database of who, one of the 4 things they do is who would we want in those top level positions? Who can we replace without congressional oversight on day one? Just walk in and say, you're fired, you're hired, and they can bypass that entire process. So yet really, he would only need one day, a few hours. In the first Trump presidency, he had an executive order, they called it Schedule F, which basically made all federal employees at will, meaning that they could be fired for any reason at any time, without any of the protections traditionally that had been in place for federal employees to sort of protect this from happening. Of course, when Biden took office, one of the first things he did was rescind that executive order. But there is nothing that would stop Trump from implementing that order again and putting all of those people back to at will, firing them all. And they already have a legion of people who are already vetted, interviewed, preparing for that role. So really dictator for a day, he'd really probably only have to be dictator for a couple of hours. And so, and that starts a whole really interesting thing. Not too long ago in an interview, he said he wouldn't rule out the thought of a third term as president. Even though there's that pesky little document in the archives in Washington, D.C. that would have something to say about that. Once
the one
again,
that's in the Trump Bible.
Yeah. details. Yeah, and it's just a complete lack. And I think it's important to understand too, that with Project 2025, it doesn't really matter whether it's Trump. We talk about Trump a lot because he is the likely front runner.
Right.
It honestly doesn't matter if it's Trump or not. It could be any conservative or ideological person who is putting into the White House. I think that with Trump, there's a sort of added level of danger, because I honestly don't know what Trump even stands for. I don't know if he knows what he stands for other than himself.
Yep.
Kind of makes me think of, the risk of sounding really gay here, chorus line, I don't know what they were for or against really except each other. And I think that's something that's really scary, because when Trump first became president, he had no idea what he was doing. So he brought in all of these people to help. And he was fine to let them do all of these things, because as long as he got the attention and he got to do what he wanted to do, he didn't really care. Project 2025 would really capitalize on that, of we can bring all these people in, we can take care of all the heavy lifting, you just do the ceremonial stuff. And I think that a president like Trump, that we have an extra danger there, because I don't think he really has much of his own ideology other than himself. I mean, the man's been a Democrat, a Republican. He's supported both. He can't seem to stay committed to anything or anyone. Just ask any of his wives. And and so I think that's a real danger. And if we had a different Republican president, I'm not saying that every Republican president would be horrible. If we had a different Republican president, they may really actually push back and say, okay, wait a minute, that's actually, I still believe in the Constitution. That's a step too far. We're not going to do that. So it really, the cat's out of the bag. It's kind of a looming thing that's going to be out there. If it's not Trump in this year, it's going to be somebody else in 4 more years.
Well, and that's our concern. With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank for details. Capital One, N.A., member FDIC. So could you provide some color of what, if Project 2025 is initiated, what that could look like specifically for LGBTQ plus people in America?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, they really bury a lot of the language. Project 2025 has a really great website. It looks nice. It's very professionally well done. And all of the really upfront messaging is messaging that, an average rational person wouldn't necessarily find issue with. But when you start to dig deeper, I would say some of the most direct attacks are definitely going to be against the T portion of the LGBT group. There's going to be immediate efforts to erase trans people from the face of the earth. You are going to see Department of Health and Human Services, removing, requiring that, at least from a federal government standpoint, that it's the biological sex assigned at birth, and that's it. And so you're going to create a situation where in certain aspects you are a man, and in certain aspects, your state, you might be recognized as a woman. It'll be very similar to how it was before the Supreme Court decision, the Kitchen decision, that allowed gay marriage, is that you might be married in one state but not married in another state. So you're definitely going to see that. You're going to see, um, we'll go back to the military bans on open service. That will be really their top and near. You're going to see that any types of discrimination protections in employment, housing, um, uh, really any type of discrimination based on sexual
Services.
orientation, services. I mean, here in Idaho already, it's now legal for uh, mental health professionals to deny you service if you're LGBT. Um, and you're going to see stuff like that on a more widespread basis. You will see, we've already seen companies with like health insurance and wanting to go back and saying, well, we're not going to cover birth control, for example. Now you're going to see people who are saying, well, we're not going to cover same-sex married couples because it's a violation of our conscience or whatnot. So, your husband or your wife might lose their medical coverage, or you might lose your medical coverage. You might lose your job, because there's really no end to where that can go. I think that you're also going to see more. We already have the "Don't Say Gay" bills. You're going to see more and more of that type of stuff on a national scale. You're going to see more library bans in Idaho, for example. Just the mere mention of an LGBT character in a book is enough to justify moving that book to the adults only section.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are going to see that level on a nationwide basis instead of just the individual state patchwork that we have right now. Certainly, you're going to see issues with marriage recognition. That government agencies would be directed that the only marriage recognized is that between a man and a woman. Those are some real direct impacts there.
Can you elaborate on that? What would we be going back to before? Just lost train of thought when that marriage equality happened. Would we be going back to that? So we might be married in some states and not married in others, or at the federal level, we're just not married, and so we don't get the federal benefits and responsibilities?
It really could go either way or both. If you think about the Dobbs decision, Justice Thomas actually indicated that he felt that the decision that legalized marriage equality was decided incorrectly and wants to go back to that, wants to revisit that decision. Conservatives, they really control more state houses, even though liberals represent more people. Conservatives hold more state houses. So for them, there is an advantage to actually push those decisions back to the state level. So, for example, if they decided, much like they did with abortion, that marriage equality should be a state issue, which I can absolutely see that happening, then you're going to go back. In Idaho, I wouldn't be able to be married, but in Hawaii, probably could be. California probably could be. And so you're going to vary from state to state. I worry about those same cases. So I'm a single parent. I have two amazing boys that I adopted from foster care in 2017. And I lived in Utah at the time. And for many years, it would have been against the law for me to even be a foster parent as a single man, let alone adopt two children. Mm-hmm. After, though, the Kitchen decision, they really had to go back and revisit those policies because essentially the idea is that you cannot discriminate against someone based on sex, right? Mm-hmm. We have the Civil Rights Act that says that. And if you look at it and your only rule is saying a single woman can adopt children or be a foster parent, but a single man can't, the only classifying difference is the sex, therefore it's discrimination, it's against the law. But if you remove that aspect of it and you go back to the way it was before, I may not have been able to ever adopt my children or be a foster parent. There's a part of me that's glad that my kids are teenagers now. My oldest is going to be 16 in a couple of weeks. because I do literally worry about what the future looks like for our family. I mean, what if Idaho, for example, decides, well, we're not going to recognize an adoption of a gay man, or we're not going to adopt, or, we're not going to recognize this. Do they, as long as I'm here, does that mean we're not a family? Do I have to move? This is why human rights can't be left up to the states. It can't be a patchwork. There's never been a proven track record of success of doing that. We have to have those federal protections in place. We are one country. Your rights should not vary depending on where you live. You should be a free American, whether you live in Idaho or Ohio or Iowa or Texas or Florida, or you name it.
So for those who might be wondering, why we're having this discussion on an LGBTQ plus money podcast, those last two topics specifically are maybe some of the strongest reasons why. One, if our marriages are dissolved, that could have a drastic effect on our financial situations. I mean, everything that I know that David and I have set up, our wills, our beneficiaries, and all that stuff, everything would be completely changed, and we'd have to adapt accordingly. And then likewise, if you're a parent, an LGBTQ plus couple who's has children that you've adopted or are fostering, or you're a single LGBTQ plus person who has an adopted child or are fostering, that just throws everything up in the air, because just picking up and moving for a lot of people isn't really that easy, especially if you're, in many cases, I can see the migration would be going from a cheaper conservative state to a more expensive liberal state, and you might not necessarily have the funds to be able to withstand that.
That's really true. Ironic too that it is that you would be moving from a cheaper conservative state. When you look at the thriving economies of the states, you look at there's always this idea of states that take more from the government than they pay in. Generally, it's those red states that are pulling more in government benefits than they're paying back than the blue states. But yeah, absolutely. I think for a lot of people, there's this idea that was never going to happen. And I don't think that, especially younger people, really realize that it's really only been one generation, one lifetime that this has all changed. I can remember being in my early 20s. I had my first, serious boyfriend, and we were sitting in the living room talking about all the things that we were not going to be able to do in our lives. That we'd have to keep everything on the down low because he wanted to be in the Army, and he was in the reserves, and he wanted to go active duty, and that was going to be a problem. We accepted the fact that we would never be able to have children or a family. We were never going to get married. We looked at actually could we start a business partnership to actually create some sort of legal definition for the two of us living here in Idaho at the time, where there was no domestic partnerships, no nothing. That's been like 20 years that was the case, and how much it's changed. And I think that a lot of people just take it for granted. And so I think what you said is so true from the standpoint of, if I had advice to give to anybody who is part of the LGBT community right now, I would be saying, at the risk of sounding like Game of Thrones, winter is coming. So we should be probably sitting on your assets. You should probably be looking at, saving more money to pay for things like that. Because really and truly, I think the most overlooked thing about financial freedom is that second part, which is freedom. And having money, having resources, having means gives you tremendous freedom and opportunity. If you, if you wake up on January 21st and find that your employment is no longer protected and you can be fired just for being gay, that's a real possibility, and you need to be prepared for that. You need to be prepared for the fact that if you are especially a trans person, that you are not going to be, I mean, if you live in Idaho and you're a trans person, there is no care available for you right now. None. Doesn't matter if you're a minor or an adult. The laws have driven all of the providers essentially out of the state. There's a distinct possibility that you might have to move, or that you might have to weather the storm. And so I think that you need to be more aware, be preparing for some really lean times. And that's not something that for a long time many Americans have been very good at or even really felt the need to have to do.
Right.
But we really are coming back to a situation where I think that you're going to have a lot of those challenges real.
So, kind of the way you're talking, and to be honest, John and I know very much what you are talking about, because in 2015, when that happened, John and I were actually shocked. We were really shocked that marriage equality passed through the Supreme Court, and that we had now had the ability to get married at the federal level, or at least have our marriage in a state recognized. I'm wondering, are we looking at maybe we've been wearing the rose-colored glasses. We have been living in a time period of privilege as LGBT people, and for that reason, we have let our guard down and are not thinking about the way in which these kinds of things, or maybe not even thinking that these kinds of things may impact us in the short term or the long term.
Yeah, I think that's 100% a possibility. And if not even a possibility, it's, I think, what's actually happening. And if you don't think that, ask any woman who lives in a red state. They had much the same thought. The Roe decision was firm. It was precedent. All three of those justices said it was settled law. There was nothing to worry about. And then they all woke up one morning in June, and all of a sudden the world had changed. And I think that it could happen that fast. And I think that we really are. And I think that for a lot of people, they think that the battle has been won and we achieved equality. We have, everything we could have ever hoped for. And now it's guaranteed and it's not going away. And that's simply not the case. And more I see that people are kind of lulled into this false sense of security. And I talk to so many people in really lots of communities, but even especially in the LGBTQ community, who don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to get involved. They don't care. And they don't feel that it affects them. It's a downer. It's all these things. And I think to myself that by removing yourself from the process, you are paving the way for this to happen. You're taking away the resistance. You can have all the parades and the marches that you want, but at the end of the day, none of that has any effect on policy.
Yeah.
The only thing that does is the people who we elect. And if you were choosing not to participate in that, then you're going to just be stuck with whatever happens. And I think it even goes a step beyond that. Many groups, I can think about in 2022, and even before that, I wanted to go speak at like pride festivals and things like that. And many of the festivals wouldn't allow me to speak because they didn't want to get political. And I think to myself, well, that's exactly what the conservatives want as well. They don't want you to get political. And there's this idea, you see it in the LGBT community, you see it in the migrant community. And really with almost any minority, they go through this phase, it's kind of the 12 steps of grief. They go through this phase of where they think, if I don't make myself a target, if I don't call attention to myself, then they'll leave me alone. So we don't want to have political people speak at our rallies or at our pride events because we don't want to become a target. Well, guess what? You're already a target.
Right.
We are. We are all targets. And so I think that one of the number one things that I would really like people who are coming out of this podcast or anything is to realize that if you are not getting involved on at least some level, then it really is going to be too late to stop any of this. And you're going to be sitting back going, what happened? You know, yesterday we had all of this freedom and today we don't. And what happened? What went wrong? Well, the answer is we let our guard down.
Yeah.
I
So
think what a lot of people don't understand, like, there's been a marked shift since the first Trump term where all of these Christo-fascists have come out of the closet because he gave them the opportunity. He gave them a voice. And these people, this contingency, part of it includes the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025. They're in a, whether we're participating or not, they're in a biblical war, and they see it as their God-given responsibility to make things right. And they've even talked about, you know, throwing away the idea that there's a separation of church and state because they want to create a Christian state, and that does not include LGBT people. I think very often we talk about, yes, right now the trans community is getting hit the most, but once they erase trans people, they're going to try to do what they can to erase the rest of the group. And I think a lot of us just don't understand that they're in a biblical war against us, and a lot of us are just like, no, I'm fine right now. Things are safe. I'm married. I'm happy. We're making money. We're comfortable. But all that, like you said, could completely change on a dime, and that's part of why Dave and I get frustrated. We see a lot of on social media and in news, younger people talking about this, but we even talked with some people who are saying, "I'm not happy with Biden. He hasn't produced the results that I was looking for. Even though economic numbers aren't as negative as people feel like things are worse than they are financially, and that's how they vote. So a lot of people are actually talking about opting out of voting. I'm not happy with the way he's handling Gaza. I'm not happy with the way Biden's handling student loans. What do you say to folks who say, I'm gonna opt out. I'm not voting this year, or I'm not going to vote for Biden again?
you know, I think that is one of the most frustrating things that I hear as a politician out there on the campaign trail. You know, I have to say with both of our presidential nominees, clarify, I'm going to be voting for Biden. But I have to say that with both of our presidential nominees, I really sometimes want to take a step back and say, you know, how did we get here? How did we get to the point of where this is the best that we have? But that being said, I think the best response that I have to those people who say, well, you know, I'm just so dissatisfied with Biden because of this, and this, then great. That means that you are an issue voter, that you were voting specifically on issues, and you've identified the issues that are important to you. Now, let me tell you some issues that you haven't mentioned that are important to me. I'm never going to vote for the president or for a person for presidency who has celebrated the fact that he put an end to a woman's right to choose. I'm never going to vote for a person for president who wanted to ban people from entering our country based on their religious background. Never gonna support someone for president who has openly attacked LGBT rights and the rights of trans people, and you know, supports bringing a military ban back. And if those issues are important to you, then yeah, people all the time, especially student loans, is the number one thing I hear out there. People are really upset about student loans. And I'm like, that's great. Be upset about student loans. Keep in mind, more student loans have been forgiven in this administration than in all other administrations combined. But, you know, by all means, be upset about that. But what about these other things? And if you honestly think that you were going to be better off under Trump, then I guess I don't know what I can say to you. But opting out of the system is giving up your voice, and it also is you have a vote. Not voting at all just makes it more likely that Trump will get reelected and that all of these things that we've described will happen. He has such a fired up base. They don't want you to vote because they know that if you vote, you're not going to vote in their favor. So by all means, don't vote. They sow all sorts of ideas of, the horrible things that are happening, and Biden is doing this and Biden is doing that. And the reality is, by all economic indicators, I should say by all, but majority of economic indicators, we're doing pretty well, especially considering where we came out from. Inflation is high, but it's coming down, and there's lots of other contributing factors to that people don't take into consideration. I think that people just need to really look at this election, look at those human rights issues and those civil rights issues, and make their decisions based on those. Economy has often cycled. It will continue to cycle. I think it's unfortunate the measures that we use to judge our economy. I mean, if you ask someone, anyone really, what's your indicator of how the economy is doing, may not be their top, but everybody's going to talk about the stock market. Well, yeah, that's great. The stock market. How much the average middle class person, how much effect does a daily shift in the stock market have in their daily lives? Is it, the Dow's up 500 points today, I guess I'll buy a pool? No, it's not that way. It has very little effect. The measure of our economy should be based on how the least of us are doing, how our poorest citizens are doing healthcare wise, how they're doing housing wise, how they're doing food wise. And if you look at those measures, we're always going to do better under a Democratic president than under a Republican president. We always have and always will, because those are the areas that we as Democrats focus on. How are the least of us doing? The people who are in the 1%, the 10%, 5%, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we always talk about the 1%, but they're going to be really fine no matter what happens.
Right.
It's those people down in the middle class, if there even is a middle class anymore, and below, who should be the measure of our economy. And so I really think that you just have to set those economic concerns aside for a moment. They're real concerns. Don't get me wrong. I've got bills to pay. You've got bills to pay. They're real concerns, but I would rather be poor and free than rich and restricted. So
that's a money quote.
Yeah, definitely is some money quote.
Literally. So what are Democrats doing to fight against Project 2025? Because quite honestly, we don't see it in the news a whole lot. And if I do see it, it's from a reporter. It's not from an elected official who actually has some power to do something.
So honestly, not enough, because I think that what you're seeing in this election cycle is exactly what you've described. People are focusing on the wrong things. They're focusing on those economic indicators. They're focusing on, perceived failures of this administration. And, there's so much focus on the border right now. There's focus on, all of these different things. And so people are simply not paying attention to those. And by the way, Trump and the conservatives, they would love you to be like that. They're very good at always putting Democrats on the defense. Mm-hmm. Interesting with abortion. There's a lot of Republicans out there who wish that the Dobbs decision would have never happened, because it's actually flipped the tables and put them on the defensive, which for years they've enjoyed not being. But we are on the defensive, and we are defending against so many issues out there that I think it just gets lost. Everything gets lost. And we really need to distill that messaging down to, look, your decision is, this is the most important presidential election you are ever going to participate in, because the outcome of this is going to determine what our future looks like in a very, very real way. and whether or not you even have an opportunity to vote again in the future. And so I think that that's part of the problem is, as Democrats, we fall too quickly into this trap of trying to defend everything, every position that we have. We're at the border, we're dealing with guns, we have all of these issues where we're on the defensive, and it just confuses people and they don't really understand what's important and what's at stake. And the reality is, if Project 2025 comes to fruition, none of those other things that we think matter right now are going to even matter anyway. And so I think that there needs to be more focus on it. I think that when you go out and you talk about it, the right is so good at messaging, so good at it, that they've positioned this in a way that, like I said, at first glance, the average person would say, well, what's wrong with that? I identify as a conservative. I want a conservative country, but they don't really realize what conservative in this uh, instance means, in this context means. And so I think really from a messaging standpoint, we as Democrats need to do more to make it, this is the issue. If you look back over what won the election for Biden, and some of his best speeches since has been talking about the heart and soul of our country, the future of democracy. This is the only thing that matters. But we're not talking about it because we are too busy arguing about whatever random thing that's out there. So we try, in my campaign, we certainly try to message on it as much as we can. It's really receptive, but the reality is we need average people to get involved, to get educated about what it is and talk to their friends, because that's how you change hearts and minds. I mean, I can sit on a debate stage or do podcasts and I'm going to reach a few people. Nothing against podcasts, sorry. But it really comes down to, we need a movement of people who understand what's at stake, and we need to build that as we go.
It's interesting you're saying that, because that is one of the things that the queer community has done so well for decades. And it seems like over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, we have kind of lost that coalition as a community, that we've kind of fractured, and we aren't we aren't that coalition of people who are out there fighting for a specific thing, whether it's the AIDS crisis and fighting for access to medicine, and trying to get the FDA to get off its ass and do something, or it's fighting for rights to exist as individuals, or to get marriage equality. All those things, we seem to have been really good at that, but all of a sudden it seems like we've kind of lost that connectivity. Have we kind of, for lack of a better way to say it, as a community, have we kind of fallen into a malaise, or have we gotten so comfortable with the fact that our lives are so privileged today compared to what they were 20, 30 years ago? And how do we recreate that?
Yeah, I think that what you're describing is absolutely true. We talked about it a little earlier with the rose-colored glasses, and I do think that for many people, they feel like the battle has been won and that they did their part already. And I think that you have so many people that for so long were repressed or forced into the closet, that now they're just out living their best lives. And I mean, go on Instagram and you'll see influencer after influencer of, all of these people living their best life. And that's wonderful. I applaud them. But I think we all get caught up into, now that we all have that, now that we have Two Guys and Some Land, or, all of these different, everything is fine. And that's not gonna change. We don't need to do anymore. It's okay for us to just live in the minute or in the moment. And we don't have to worry about that. We'll worry about that if it becomes a problem. And I'm like, you really have lost, you've lost the struggle that you described. You've lost the struggle of people like Harvey Milk or Marsha P. Johnson or any of these other people who have been out there who really gave it their all, literally, to fight these battles to create the world that we now live in. And we're not holding up our end of the bargain. We're, democracy and freedom, those are things that you have to nurture and fight for every single day. And as a general rule, we're just not interested in that. And I really do think a part of it is, for so long, we were put down, that now that we are able to be in the spotlight, we're really just enjoying that at the moment. And I don't know how we get back to fix that. I mean, I really thought that the Dobbs decision would have been enough to really get people, especially with what Justice Thomas said, would have been enough to get people to realize, wait a minute, there's problems looming on the horizon. It really wasn't. And, it's very easy for people to get into this mindset of, well, that's not me. And, and even within our community, we're not as united as we once was. There's a lot of people that I run into, people all the time who identify as part of the LGBTQ community, but they're not willing to stand up for trans rights because, well, it's not them, and, well, I don't really understand it, and how can I defend something I don't understand? To which I want to say, well, what did you expect people to do for you for years and years? Defend something that they didn't understand? Or bisexual or asexual or any of these new, things that have, that people have felt free to now be who they are and identify as who they are. It's actually created kind of a fracture within our community. I know of a really fairly prominent activist here who is not a huge fan of drag queens. And I'm like, so instead of, using his voice to help lift everybody up or just staying silent, he's actually making it worse and saying, well, we shouldn't be having these shows and we shouldn't be having. And I'm like, that fracture is just something we can't afford right now.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think we need something that we can all coalesce around, that we can all get behind. It's interesting. And folks who are listening, you've heard me say this before about our journey of getting out of debt. The habits that helped us get out of debt are the habits that helped us stay out of debt. Well, I think it's kind of similar to the habits or the way we live our lives, the things we talk about, the people we surround ourselves with that helped us build a strong LGBT community, that helped us get the rights that we have, are the exact same things we still need to be doing today so that we can maintain these rights. It's once you have it, it's nice to have it, but you have to figure out how to maintain that. And there's lots of different aspects to that. And one of those is our financial state and how we use our money to help our community.
Yeah, it's true. When you think about finances, one of the things I often hear is, people who will get out of debt, for example, the precipitation to that is often, I hit rock bottom. I got to a point of where I couldn't afford my bills. There was no more money I could borrow. They needed to hit rock bottom before they could finally decide, okay, it's a problem and I have to move up. Wouldn't it be great if we could get to that same conclusion without having to hit rock bottom first? Right. And I look at it the same thing with where we are. It's really sad, but I think it's entirely possible that we may not get that cohesion and that coalescing together again until something bad really happens. And then we're going to start all over right at the bottom, and we're going to fight all of those battles again. Can't tell you how many people that I know who were alive and active when the Roe decision was first made, and now are looking going, 50 years later, I have to do it all again.
Yeah.
Well, for us, it's not even going to be 50 years later. It's going to be 20 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later. We have to do it all again. And so it would be really great if we could recognize that, hey, we don't need to hit rock bottom in order for us to come together. But I just don't know if it's possible. LGBT people in politics are so underrepresented. There's a lot of elected positions in this country, tens of thousands of them. And there's only a few hundred, maybe 1,000 actual elected LGBT officials. It's nowhere near the number that it should be. And when you think about everything from cemetery districts and school boards and county commissions and, state legislatures and federal office and, all of these different things all along the way, it's pretty drastic how little our representation actually is. We're tens of thousands short. And we need to up that representation in order for us to continue to push back against these things that are happening and to make sure that those are safe. But nobody really wants to get into politics. I think most of us who are in politics, I shouldn't say most of us, many of us who got into politics got in there sort of accidentally because we had some issue that we really cared about, that we wanted to push forward. And I think we just need to see that on a larger scale. And how do we communicate to people that this is an issue that they should care about?
Yeah. It's interesting. I appreciate you bringing this up, and it kind of triggered or reminded me of the one of the comments that we got on one of our videos on YouTube when we were talking about affordable small cities for people to live in across the United States. One person, the comment was, "Gays don't go there because this is the front line of where the attack against our community is happening, and it's the plan of the conservative movement, the religious right movement, to move into small cities, small towns, take over the governments in those kinds of places, so that they can start this as a very less visible way of taking over and starting to weed out any sort of protections or rights that LGBT people may have, or rights that immigrants or women have." Do you think that that's an accurate statement? And is this the way that we would help to try to push back on that? Is that more of us at a grassroots, small town, small city level get involved in politics?
I absolutely think that that is the case, and that's what should happen. There are gay people in every community in this country, every single one. Now, whether or not they live out in the open or not, that's another story, but they're there. And I think that, it's really important to get out and get involved and be visible. And I know one of the ways that you really will help change those hearts and minds is being visible. I think about just what my own experiences meant in my own community. When I decided to run for office, it's one thing to be out. It's another thing to have literal billboards and banners all over the state, or yard signs. HOAs were banning pride flags. People were burning the pride flags in Boise or vandalizing them. So my campaign switched and made our yard signs rainbow signs. Little known fact about HOAs: political yard signs are protected speech, and your HOA can't, at least in Idaho and in many states, can't make you take it down.
Nice.
And so we had rainbow yard signs. There's a lot different from being out and being out.
Right.
And it brought a lot of attention, and it brought a lot of questions, because often people just assume what they want to assume. Literally, some people I ran into were like, "I can't believe you're gay. You're such a nice guy."
Because all of us who are gay are evil people.
Absolutely.
Are not nice people.
And but I've seen that as also a tremendous opportunity, and I can't guarantee that everybody is going to react well to you. I really can't, especially in some communities. But I think often you would be surprised. And like I mentioned, I have two boys, and they're both involved in Boy Scouts, which was something that I had always wanted to do when I was younger. But I had a single mom, was for a parent, and it just wasn't in the cards for us. And so it was something that I wanted to do with them. And it amazes me because the people that are in their troop, the other adult leaders, I would consider that they're very conservative. And yet they're getting to know me in the context of being another parent, being active and involved in helping with things at the troop, has really changed their opinion. And I can't tell you how many of them are like, "You're the first gay person I've ever met." I'm like, well, that's probably not true.
Right.
But in fact, I'd reasonably certain there's one or two in your family tree somewhere. But just the level of change and acceptance that you see there, and how it's really changed minds of people. Because for many people out there, when they think of someone who's gay or or anything in the LGBT community, all they see are the media portrayals or what conservative talk radio is telling them, that they're all evil, and that they're going to do this and they're going to do that, and they're going to make your kids wear dresses, and they're going to do all of these things. And so the best thing that I think that we can do is get out and show that we are not a monolith. There are all sorts of different ways to be a gay person or an LGBT person. And I mean, in a lot of ways, there's some of us, sure, there are some of us that spend hours and hours a day at the gym. I am not one of those people. There are others that are, we're just parents, and we have our kids. We want them to be involved in things. I want them to have a better life than what I do. We have family game nights. We bake things. We do all sorts of stuff. I bake an obscene amount of bread and things like that. And I'm
We're
like,
coming to your house.
I'm a great cook. And but I think it's really important, because if we don't want to live by how we are portrayed, then we have to show who we are.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're abdicating that responsibility and letting people define us. And so I 100% encourage people to get involved. And maybe it's not running for office, because quite honestly, there are some places it's probably not safe. That's sad, but it's true. But there's lots of other ways to get involved. You can volunteer, you can help, and you can help and volunteer with campaigns even not in your area. And every little bit helps. When you are running as an openly gay candidate, or anybody from the community, you are automatically giving away a part of your support base, your financial support base. There are many of our large donors here in Idaho who simply will not donate to me.
Yeah.
I give that up. The trade-off is I get to be visible for people all over this country. In the Senate run, we got letters all the time from people all over, especially younger people, teenagers, saying, it just meant so much to hear someone saying things about them that mattered, and treating them like they were human, and that they mattered. Those are all things that we can do, but we do give up a big portion of our support base. And we hope that we're going to make that up, because people from all over the country are going to say, well, we know that our representation is less. We don't have people running here locally that I can support, so I'm going to support all of the people that are running. That doesn't always happen. And, when you look at races, especially in those conservative red states, that's where the real opportunity is for us. I mean, a race like mine, I couldn't have a better foil, because we are one of the most anti-LGBT states in the country. We are the birthplace of the trans women sports bans. We are the most restrictive abortion bans in the country. We have some of the worst bans on trans healthcare in the country. So excellent foil. There's lots of stuff that we can that we can talk about and issues that we can bring. And because I'm not in what's considered a close race, I don't have this worry that like I can't take a position that is important or meaningful for me because I can't afford to lose 200 votes. The delta in my race is 70,000 plus votes. And so honestly, when you're in a race that no one thinks you can win, you have nothing to lose. So it's a real tremendous opportunity to talk about things like Project 2025, things like LGBT issues. And you asked earlier why more politicians don't talk about it. Well, any politician that's in an area that's a close race, they know they're going to need Republican and conservative votes to win. And so they don't want to say or do anything that might offend a conservative or a moderate conservative who may vote for them.
Right.
I don't have those concerns. I can go out and say what's important. And I can have rainbow yard signs. No other I don't know of any other politician in the entire country that did that. There might be, but we can do that here and we can be that level of visibility. And I think that is what it's going to take. We have to normalize LGBT people running for office. That's the only way we're ever going to have more.
Yeah.
I appreciate this, your conversation here around the being a extreme underdog in the race. That doesn't mean that you should not get involved. I love that, the fact that you're using this as an opportunity to be there for the people who need to see it, not just to win. And I think that many of us in the LGBT community may think that, especially those of us who live in red states or purple states that have been voting more red recently, that it's more about what we can do with what we have. It's not just about winning. And I think that there are lots of ways for us to get involved. If you don't want to be a candidate yourself, find those candidates who will support LGBT rights and volunteer and support them financially and do what you can to get those people into office, or at least more visible in talking about these issues.
Absolutely. My philosophy since I got into politics, like I said, it was sort of accidental, has always been, what's our win, even if we don't win?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of politicians out there who are one and done, because it is hard. It's really hard. I mean, I had death threats. I had to pull my kids out of school for 2 weeks. It's hard. But at the end of the day, it has to be done. And so we just have to keep doing it. And we have to create that normalization. And I think that for me, I always look at, okay, so really good example from my Senate race. We had people who worked on my campaign who, after that campaign was over, have gone on. That was their first real campaign experience. Then they went on to work with other LGBT candidates in smaller races because they could take what they learned on my race and move that on. We can bring more attention to issues in states like Idaho, and just issues in general because of those things that we're willing to talk about. So when you're running in politics, you have a soapbox and you have a megaphone for at least 6 months to a year. And how can we use that to really promote the issues that matter? How can we, and I don't just talk about LGBT issues. I'm also a big supporter of the Dreamers, and I want to see, those DACA protections formalized. People have been in limbo for years and years and years, and it's not okay. I want to see reform with guns. I'm a parent. My kids are in school. We've had 2 school shootings within 20 minutes of my house. And I want my kids to come home every day. And if that means that somebody can't buy an assault rifle, then somebody can't buy an assault rifle.
Amen.
Sorry, hate to break it to you.
Yeah.
And it needs to be said. And that's, by the way, a fairly unpopular opinion in Idaho.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much the only politician who will say it.
That kind of
But it,
surprises me. Not.
but it needs to be said. And I think that something that is missing from politics is people saying what needs to be said or saying what they actually feel. Everybody is so focused on votes or fundraising. I already know I'm not going to raise the money that I need. My Senate race was the most expensive race in Idaho's history, not by what I spent, by what my opponent spent. And there's no way I could have kept up with him. My congressional race, there's no way I'm going to match dollar for dollar. I mean, it's totally possible. People raise money all the time for ridiculous things. People raise money all the time for really good causes. But we know we're going to get outspent. But that doesn't mean that we don't keep fighting. How many marches and I mean, even look at marriage equality. How long did it take for us to get there? And anywhere along the way, if one of those people or a handful of those people would have stopped, we wouldn't be where we are now.
Yeah.
And so we just have to keep going, even when it seems impossible.
So with that, how can the community help grow your platform, whether it's contributions with money or any other resources?
Well, absolutely. We love contributions with money. Those help. That's what really drives the political world. We can't get our message out without contributions. But really, beyond that, get involved, share content. If there are other people out there who would like me to get on and speak to their group, or I'm happy to speak to people all over the country, even though you can't vote for me. I'd like to think that there's still information that's relevant that you should know about. If people want help running for office, email my campaign, reach out to me. And we're going to be kind of busy for the next few months, and it's too late for you to get on the ballot this cycle, but we'll help when it comes around again. Follow us on social media. All the handles are Roth for Idaho, and that's FOR, not the number 4. And URL is rothforidaho.org. There's really so many ways that you can get involved. If you know LGBT people, or really anybody in Congressional District 2 here in Idaho, who they don't like to talk politics, but get them to talk politics and make sure that you're holding them accountable to go vote, because even if it doesn't matter to them, it matters to you. And so don't be afraid to use the whole, okay, well, I get that you don't care, but I do. So can you do it for me? It's really that level of where we need to be at in order to push this forward.
Awesome. Great advice. So one question that we're asking everybody these days to hopefully lift spirits a little bit during these dark times. What's one thing that has you feeling positive?
I think it's really important to always look for something that is positive. And sometimes it's hard. I'm pretty lucky though, because my positivity often comes from my children. They just finished the school year. Both of them maintained decent grades. They're all moving on. And I try to think that they really are our hope for a better world. I think that that's probably how my parents felt about me. And I don't know that we delivered on that, but I see so many of the youth today, how involved they are. And I want to see them continue to channel that into making a positive change. And so I think that we're really lucky that we've got a lot of young people out there who really care about a lot of things. And I think that gives us hope for a better tomorrow.
I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing, talking about this important topic that's not being talked about enough in the community, let alone nationally. And best of luck in your campaign. I know you feel like an underdog, but crazy things can happen. So maybe enough people will hear this podcast and enough money will come your way. You can turn Idaho blue.
Absolutely. Your lips to God's ears.
Right.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's been really great. And I look forward to following you and seeing what all you're doing as well.
Thank you.
The mission of Queer Money is to financially empower the LGBTQ plus community. Join us in thanking Capital One for supporting that mission. Thank you, David, for sharing with us this critical information for the queer community. Hopefully, our community is ready to take some action. Thank you, our listeners and viewers, for joining us for another episode. Get your Queer Money takeaway and resources mentioned in this episode in this week's newsletter.
Then join us this Thursday when we cover the most affordable LGBTQ plus friendly cities in Sunbelt states for you cold-blooded queer people. And next Tuesday when we share the best side gigs to have while you're in retirement. Thank you and have a great week.